Hey everybody, Rachel here with Givebutter. Thanks for joining for another success story from the Givebutter community. Today we are highlighting Knit for Food. You might recognize the name because we featured them as a campaign we love on our site as well as a good newsletter. Recently, Knit for Food's 12-hour knit-a-thon raised over, get this, $265,000 on Givebutter, which was backed by more than 5,000 supporters. I think you're really going to love hearing more about this one. I have Laura here with me to share how they raised funds and awareness for food insecurity. And she's also going to tell us what made her turn to Givebutter with tips, tricks, lessons learned, all the things you want to know about. Laura, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your story today.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be able to share what we got done in that short period of time.
Yeah, so to start, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody and how you started for food?
Sure. So my name is Laura Nelkin. I'm a knitwear designer. I live in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region. I've been working as a knitwear designer for about 15 years, but I went to Cornell for apparel design. So I've been steeped in making and creating for kind of as long as I can remember. And to make a long story short, my daughter, who's in college, got sent home last spring when the pandemic started. And when she finished her spring semester, she got a job through AmeriCorps working for our local food bank doing food intake. So all summer long, last summer, so it was the summer of 2020, while I was working in the studio, I could hear her on the phone upstairs in her bedroom doing intake and basically signing up my neighbors to get food at our local food banks who were experiencing food insecurity for the first time. And I was never aware of the extreme hunger and food insecurity that was being experienced by people right in my region before that. Like, it was really just firsthand. And she was going to distributions and helping people get food. And our dinner conversations were very much centered around this issue that we had heard about, but weren't completely aware of before. So I knew that that was something that I wanted to work on and put some energy towards and help create some kind of, not necessarily solution, but help.
Right.
What I do is fun. I love knitting. I love creating. It creates community. Knitting is therapy. I'm sure you guys have heard that. It's meditation. It's everything good for you, but it can be a little, I don't know, self-absorbed, right? Like, it's me and my needles and what am I doing for the world? And this was something I felt like I can do something for my neighbors and something for my country. And so I was inspired by the Gilmore Girls episode. I believe it was like season 7, episode 9.
Yes. Oh, that's amazing.
Where they have a knit-a-thon for Stars Hollow to like raise money to build a bridge. And I was like, well, Lorelai did a knit-a-thon and that raised tons of money. So why don't we do that? So then I Googled knit-a-thon, and it turns out doing a knit-a-thon is not a new thing. There's been knit-a-thons done since probably before Gilmore Girls, but I did stumble across a knit-a-thon run by the Knitflix girls. They're a group of women who are called the Knitflix Knit-a-thon, and they got together to raise money for Black Lives Matter, and they used Givebutter, and I think Givebutter focused on them on a blog post. So I was able to read that blog that Givebutter had done and really get an idea of how they harnessed Givebutter to be able to do their project. And then I reached out to them and was like, hey, would you guys tell me what you did and what I shouldn't do or what I should do if I'm thinking about doing this? And I'd never met them before. And we got together, and it was 4 women in their 20s, like fresh out of college. They were an inspiration. I'm not worried about our country's future with women like that at the helm, right?
That's right.
So exciting. And they were completely open and transparent and shared everything they did and what they felt like worked and what they felt like they made too confusing. And I took what they gave me and pared it down to like the basic bones, because I've learned that the simpler I can do something, the more powerful it can be sometimes, right? Like the more I can make it not as complicated. So I didn't have teams competing against each other. We were all just in it and raising as much money as we can. We weren't counting how much somebody was raising every hour on that last day of the event. Everybody was working together, and we were just going for the biggest total number we could get without any competition between ourselves.
I love that. That's amazing. Shout out to Club Knitflix gals. Hi, miss you guys.
I know, they're awesome.
They are amazing, inspiring. Please give us an update. What have you been up to since then? That is amazing. And it's incredible how you took that personal inspiration and just thought how you could be a change maker, seeing issues that were happening in your own community with food insecurity, and do the most good in many communities across our country. Because I know you partnered with 4 different nonprofits that have a large reach, are doing so much good in our communities. And you took really a community approach. So instead of getting hyper gamified and creating these teams who compete against each other, you really just rallied around as one community, one voice for one cause. So I thought that message was really clear when I looked at your fundraiser. Kudos to all of you. So can you break down for us some of your success in the end? Like, how did all those funds come in? What was a breakdown of that? Do you know how many supporters you had? All that kind of stuff.
Sure. And the first thing I want to say is that we split the funds raised between 4 organizations. It was Feeding America, Meals on Wheels, Node Kid Hungry, and World Central Kitchen. Kind of each of those organizations has a special focus. And I think it was really important to me that we be hitting all of the bases. And one of the reasons I think we had the success we did is somehow I convinced them to let us use their logos, which isn't necessarily, I don't know, I think I just said the right words or something. Or I almost was like, well, Dad said I could use his logo. If you say I can use your logo.
Right.
And that worked out. But the fact that we were able to have all of those on the logo on our graphics was really helpful for people to understand exactly where the money was going. In the end, we had over 700 knitters sign up to fundraise. Wow. What we told our knitters was that they needed to raise a minimum of $100 to get the Zoom link to be able to be on the Zoom event the day of, because I wanted to give them some kind of incentive, right? It seems like you could either probably raise $100 or maybe be able to donate $100 yourself to be in on the Zoom for that day. That's a lot less than doing a knitting retreat on Zoom for a weekend. So we had 700 plus knitters sign up. 492 of them raised over $100. So those of them that didn't end up raising $100, we gave them the Zoom link anyway, because this is, in the spirit of full cooperation. I didn't want anybody to feel left out of it in the end. 167 of them raised over 500, 66 raised over 1,000, and 14 raised over 2,000. So the bulk of money raised was raised by people who raised right around $100, which is pretty cool, right? Like it wasn't that everybody was going all out with their fundraising, or some of that is people who have a stronger social media presence or have done a lot of giving in the past, right? Then that giving kind of comes back to you when you start to do your fundraising. So I think there's a few different reasons for that. We had 5,258 unique donations, and 4,163 of them were $50 and under. So it was a really strong showing of small donations building up that whole. There were very few donations that were over $1,000 for sure. I think there were 4 or 5 that were over $1,000. We did end up with a few private foundations that donated separately to the organizations, equal amounts to the 4 organizations. So we actually raised about $5,000 more than the amount.
Wonderful.
And those I just told people to donate directly, and we kind of kept track of that.
Yeah, that is really fascinating to hear. But what you're saying goes along with so much research that we've been seeing in the last year of the pandemic in terms of giving trends, is that so many more people have been showing up, but maybe giving less. And that makes sense with what's been going on in our world, right? But I
Mhm.
think that there's been this myth that people aren't showing up, that people are raising less. In fact, we're seeing people raise more than ever because more people in compassion are showing up for one another. And it sounds like
Mhm.
your fundraiser is a testament to that as well.
Definitely. And I also told the knitters early on, I was like, everybody you've ever knit for, like as a knitter, I knit for people often. I make them hats, I keep them warm. I give them a shawl, something that
Mhm.
reminds me of them. Like anybody you've ever knit for, hit them up and just be like, well, it turns out there were strings attached to that hat. So I think a lot of people were like, there was a very obvious place for them to do their fundraising. A lot of us, myself included, raffled off a piece of knitwear to everybody who donated under their name. So I raffled off an Afghan that I had knit, and I said, I actually raffled
Nice.
it to any people who donated or signed up to fundraise. But a lot of people knit a hat during the day and then donated it to somebody who, raffled it off to somebody who donated to them. Um, some people knit all day for charity that day. So we did a blog
Mhm.
post with lots of different charity places
Fun.
that you could knit for, to give them ideas of places that accept donations for hats or blankets, etc.
Mhm.
And that was helpful. Like some people really took those 12 hours and focused it towards something. Some people knit themselves part of a sweater. It was really,
Cool.
their 12 hours to do with what they wanted. We did have
Yeah.
Zoom programming, not the whole time, because being on Zoom for 12 hours is insane.
Yes.
I don't think knitting for 12 hours is insane. Being on Zoom, like, forget about it. So we had
Right.
4 kind of breakout sessions during the day. They were all around 2
Oh,
hours.
okay.
We had speakers from the 4 organizations. We had knitting teachers. We had someone who taught knitting ergonomics. We had knitting meditation. We had knitting stretches.
Ooh.
So we kind of like took care of everybody's bodies. And we
Mhm.
learned from farmers who raise sheep, learned a little bit
Wow.
about the meat industry, which I think kind of fed into Knit for Food.
Yeah.
But no one was on there for more than a half hour. Most speakers were 15 minutes, some were a half hour.
Okay.
So we kept it going. And I think the best part of
Right.
the day is we had playlists. So we all just hung out and knit
Ooh.
together. And the Knitflix girls did a playlist. They had done that on their event and said it went really well. And one of
Mhm.
my other friends did a playlist. So we all just listened to the same songs and like sang around. Some people danced while they knit. It was really fun, super fun.
How fun. I love that. I love that you're kind of giving everyone a behind the scenes of how you made it interesting, because I'm sure people who are watching right now are wondering, okay, 12 hours, how did you plan that out? So that is super helpful. I'm just sharing my screen here so people can see your beautiful campaign. As you mentioned, you have these recognizable logos right at the top, everything so beautifully branded across your page. Your story section was heartfelt, to the point. You knew exactly where your donation was going and the impact it would make. I also want to point out for everyone who's following along, here's a hack from Laura: FAQ, shareable social images, and merch on Redbubble. I just thought this was genius. You made it so straightforward. It was easy to follow. You answered all the questions people were already wondering. So I don't know if that's something you added to over time as the campaign went on, or you started with it, but either way, kudos. That was really well done.
Thank you.
Anything else that you think would be helpful for other fundraisers who are watching along, that either are lessons learned or tips and tricks that you haven't shared yet?
Oh, I'd love to share that. So one thing that I would say that was super helpful was reminding people to use the hashtag, which I've never had real success with hashtags before, but every post that I did, I used the hashtag and I reminded people in every email. I sent out an email once a week. So we launched this 6 weeks before the Knitathon date, and I would send out an email every Sunday. And if we got questions during the week, I would update that FAQ, and then make sure that at the bottom of every email, there were those links to the FAQ. My goal as a knitwear designer is, if I get less email, I get to knit for more. And I kind of applied that to this as well. Like, the more I can answer people's questions ahead of time and make it easy for them to find things, the more time I'm going to have to put into other projects, right? So
Mhm.
I applied that to this as well. And reminding them to use the hashtag, it meant when we got to the day of, that hashtag was getting used as people were knitting. And then if somebody saw their post like on Instagram or Facebook and they clicked on the link, they could see the power behind the project because so many people were using it. It like went way beyond my small following on Instagram to so many more people. And that ended up being a really strong way of sharing the project and getting other people on board, because the goal for this was like, the more knitters we sign up, the more people are fundraising, the stronger our community is. And so they were really beyond my initial pushes. It was everybody getting their friends to sign up and knit with them. And I think that I attribute that to the success, is everybody working together and making it happen.
Absolutely. And if I'm remembering right, because I was a fan and follower watching this along the way as you had launched it. If I'm remembering right, your goal was way smaller than what you raised, right? Didn't you increase it over time?
I did. I mean, I was scared in the beginning. I didn't want to be like all ego-y and be like, I'm going to raise $50,000.
Right.
You know? So I think we started at 10 and then we went to 20 and then we went to 30 and then we were like, okay, this is insane. Let's just put it to 50. And wouldn't that be amazing? And then we kind of kept doing increments. And once we put it at 150, that was about 5 days before the event. I was like, we're not raising the goal again, because now, I mean, I'm not a professional fundraiser, but my gut was, it looks good at the end if you've blown your goal out of the water. Right. So we decided not to raise the goal again and just leave it at 150,000, which was absolutely phenomenal, and see what happened. And I don't think we'll be able to do that next year, because we will do it again in 2022. And I think we'll, set the goal at a more reasonable start point. But I think it really helped with the momentum to keep reaching the goal and keep being able to say, we're like, we met our goal, we're raising it again. I think that helped with the progression of the project.
Absolutely. And you just mentioned, Laura, that you're not a professional fundraiser. So everybody who's watching right now, lest you think that Laura is fundraising all day, every day, this is her first real big fundraiser. So, but you grew up around fundraising. Can you tell everyone a little bit about that, just to give them a sense of a glimmer of hope for those that are watching that are like, I'm totally new to fundraising. How did she do this? I don't know if I have the confidence to do it. Can you tell them a little bit about your story?
Oh, sure. So, yes, this is totally my first fundraiser. Never done any fundraising before, besides like doing some walks in Ithaca for our local cancer resource center. And, but growing up, my mom was a stay-at-home mom till I was around 10 or 11. And then she went to go back into the workforce and she got into fundraising, and she ended up working for the Metropolitan Opera and New York City Opera and NYU. So I spent my teenage years at the dinner table listening to my mom talk about fundraising. And as much at the time as I might have been rolling my eyes back in my head, I think a lot sunk in. So when I kind of jumped into this, I went with what felt right. And it seemed to work. But I think the messaging, keeping it clean and easy, and I always go with that elevator speech approach. Like you should be able to be in an elevator ride with somebody and explain exactly what you're doing quickly and have it be, clear and concise. So we really worked on that with the messaging to get that out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your story and success with us today. Just incredible to think, and inspiring for those of us who are new to fundraising, or maybe just have a dream or idea of ways that we can make an impact in the world for good. And just really appreciate you giving your time and sharing all that you use Givebutter.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's fun to be able to tell the story from another perspective.
And for everybody else who is following along, thank you so much for joining us today. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment on this video. And if you have any questions that I didn't ask Laura that you're dying to know, maybe you're trying to make your own knit-a-thon and I didn't ask the right question, drop it below and maybe Laura and I can get back to you about it. We will see you again next week for another incredibly inspiring success story in the Givebutter community. Until then, happy fundraising. Bye, everybody.